Today we are solving trig equations using a calculator. Today we're only going to be looking at angles in degrees, and our next lesson is going to be on radians. So using our calculator, of course, the first thing we need to make sure we're doing is checking the mode on our calculator. So for these problems, because we're going to be solving for degrees, which you can tell by seeing this is between 0 degrees and 360 degrees, we're going to, on our calculator, make sure that we are in degree mode. So go to your mode, make sure you are in degrees. Okay. Our first step after checking the mode is to isolate the trig function, which means we are getting it by itself. So for number 1, right now we're trying to get sine by itself. So right now it says sine theta minus 1. We're going to get rid of the 1 by adding 1 to both sides, which leaves us with sine of theta is equal to, if we do negative 1.82 plus 1, it's going to leave us with negative 0.82. And again, if you're not sure, this is something you can also be doing on your calculator. Right, so negative 1.82 plus 1 gives you negative 0.82. Okay. So just like before, there's going to be two parts of this problem. So first, sine is already one of the three main ones. It's not a reciprocal, so we're good. It's sine. The two parts we're going to look at is the number and the positive or negative. So the first thing we're going to do is take the number. This is the part where before we were using the chart, but clearly 0.82 is not on our chart. So we're going to be using the inverse button on our calculator to get to our reference angle. So what we're going to do to find alpha is on your calculator there's an inverse button which looks like this, sine negative 1. We're going to use that to work backwards to get to our angle. So again, it's 0.82 because we're ignoring the negative. This is going to be a different part of our problem. So on our calculator, we're going to go to inverse sine, which is second sine, and then you're going to type in 0.82. This is going to give us our reference angle. So because this is in degrees, we're going to round to the nearest whole number. So 55 degrees is our reference angle. Now the second part of this problem is using the negative sign. So we want sine to be negative. So all students take classes. Sine is going to be negative in the third and the fourth quadrant. And just like what we did yesterday, we're not going to put these two together to find our two different answers. So in this third quadrant right here, we know that we're going to be starting with 180 degrees. And because it's going from 180 towards 270, we know it's increasing. So our first angle is going to be 180 degrees plus our reference angle, which is 55. And that's going to give us 180 plus 55, 235. So that's our first answer. Our second answer is going to be in the fourth quadrant. So this one is closer to 360. And because I'm going from 360 towards 270, I know it's decreasing, so I'm going to take 360 and subtract my reference angle, which is 55. And that's going to give me 305. So my two answers for this problem are 235 degrees and 305 degrees. Okay, let's look at number 2. So first thing, we want to get the trig function by itself, so we need to get rid of this 5. Right now it's 5 times cotangent. So to get rid of 5, we're going to do the reciprocal or the opposite. So instead of multiplying, we're going to divide. That cancels out this 5. We have cotangent is equal to 12 over 5. But notice cotangent is not one of our main trig functions. This is a reciprocal. So we actually need to rewrite this as tangent, and we're just going to flip this. So instead of 12 over 5, it's going to be 5 over 12. Once we're here, it's the same thing we were doing before. We have one part, and we're going to have another part from the positive. So using our calculator, we can find our reference angle by using the inverse tangent button. So that is second tangent. Second tangent, and we're typing in 5 over 12. That gives you your reference angle, which again we're going to round to the nearest whole number. So because it's 22.6, we're going to round it to 23 degrees. We want tangent to be positive So using all students take classes, that would be in the first quadrant and the third quadrant. And now combining these two, we have, in the first quadrant, we know our angle is going to start at 0, and because it's going towards 90, we're going to be adding 50 or 23 degrees. So 0 plus 23 gives you 23. In the third quadrant, we're starting at 180, and because it's going towards 270, again, it's increasing. So we have 180 plus 23, which is 203. And these are my two answers. Okay, let's go up to number 3. So again, your first step is to get the trig function by itself. So we're trying to get cosine by itself. We're going to first subtract 9 from both sides. 7 minus 9 leaves you with negative 2. Divide by 3. And cosine is negative 2/3. Here, cosine is one of our main functions. We don't need to do anything to it. We have two different parts though. So again, we're ignoring the negative part. When we put this into our calculator to find that reference angle, we're using cosine inverse of 2/3. Again, you're ignoring the negative part, so you should not be putting negative into your calculator ever while we're doing this. So we have second cosine of 2/3, and that gives us, we're going to round to the nearest degree, so we have 48 degrees. This is our reference angle, and because cosine is negative, it's going to be in the second and third quadrant. So our angles, they're both starting with 180 degrees. In the second quadrant, we're going towards 90, so it's decreasing. So we have 180 minus 48 degrees. And in the third quadrant, it's going towards 270, so it's increasing, and we have 180 plus 48 degrees. This is going to give us our two answers, which are 132 degrees and 228 degrees. Okay, finally, we're going to do the last problem. This one is without a calculator, so we do not need a calculator for this problem. So when you see something that looks like this is cosine squared. This is just a notation, right? Note, whenever you have cosine squared, it's not going to look like this. They're going to put the squared next to the cosine. It really means the whole thing is being squared. Okay, so if you put squared at the end like this, what it means is that just your angle is being squared. So usually you're going to see the squared next to your cosine. Okay, so just like before, we're first trying to get this by itself. So we're going to add 3 to both sides. Divide by 4. And now, like we just talked about, cosine squared means the whole thing is squared. If we want to get rid of squared, we're going to take the square root of both sides. That cancels out the squared, so we're just left with cosine. And when we take the square root, you're actually going to have two answers when you take the square root, either positive or negative root 3 over 4. You can simplify this more because you can actually take the square root of 4. The square root of 4 is 2, so we can take the 2 out from underneath the square root because we can actually take the square root of that. 3 stays within it. So now this should look familiar from what we were doing yesterday because this is going back to our chart. So when is cosine root 3 over 2? Look at your chart. Cosine is root 3 over 2 when your alpha, your reference angle, is 30 degrees or pi over 6. Right. So unlike the problems where we've been doing before, your cosine could either be positive or negative. If it could be positive or negative, what this means is in our chart of all students take classes, if it could be either or, it could actually be in any of the quadrants. right? Because if it's positive, it would be either in these two, and if it's negative, it would be in these two. So if it could be either one, it doesn't matter. It could be any of these. So it's all 4 quadrants are what we're looking for. And so today we're only looking at degrees, since the question's saying between 0 and 360 degrees. So we're only going to be looking at 30 degrees. So let's start with our first quadrant. So here we got 0 plus 30 gives you 30 degrees. We have 180 minus 30, which gives us 150. 180 plus 30, which gives us 210. And finally 360 minus 30, which gives us 330. So for this problem, we have 4 different answers because it could be in any of these 4 quadrants.